Now we're going to discuss Chapter 28, the labor market, demand, supply, and outsourcing. I really think most of what is in this chapter is so closely related to things we've already talked about that it really doesn't require a whole lot of explanation, honestly. I will go through and sort of revisit supply and demand and relate that to the labor market, although we have done some of that along the way already. So I really don't think that's a very big leap. In this segment, I want to focus on the part that is somewhat, might appear to be somewhat different from things we've talked about. Specifically, I'm referring to figure 28-1. That's where we're going to calculate marginal revenue product and the marginal fixed cost for a firm. And when we do that, I think you'll go, oh, that's all that is? But I could see that appearing challenging looking at the book, so I want to make sure I devote a video segment to doing that. And then the last thing I'm going to say by way of introduction of Chapter 28 is that part of the chapter talks about the elasticity of demand for labor, and that part I think I'm just going to suggest that you just, if you need to at all, look back at our chapter on elasticity, and I think you'll see it's really the same thing. It's the same thing. It's the determinants of elasticity are as true for labor as they are for any other good or service. So that part I'm going to go lightly on, but I'm going to devote this segment to explaining figure 28-1, which is on page 626. If you want to look at that, or if you have looked at that, you probably already said, well, what's going on in that table? And that's what we're out to explore in this segment. So I'm going to start from scratch and list everything that's on the table. We're given some number of workers per week, so we typically abbreviate that with an L. And this is just that. It's the number of workers we might have come in and do work in the production of this good. And when we have these workers come in, we have different levels of output that they succeed in making. So now I think it's largely to provide job security. Column 2 is labeled total product. What's wrong with good old Q? That's the output of the firm. So it's just the output of the firm. You call it what you want to. I usually just call it Q. I think that's mostly what it's called, usually what it's called. But here it's called total product. So I'll just do this. Total product is equal to Q. Same thing, different term. When there are 6 workers, they're 2,175 units made. When there are 7, they're 2,500 units made. 2,800 when there are 8 units. 3,075. 3,325. As I'm writing these, think about what's going on here. These outputs going up as you add workers. Is that surprising? Probably not. Output goes up if you add workers, right? But what else do we know about output as we add workers? In what way does it go up? Does it always just go up more and more and more? Nope. We've explored this before. Our marginal product of labor is something that we looked at with the costs of production. He just calls it marginal product. It is typical to mention that we're talking about labor. And if we do that, again, then we recognize we've already explored this with the cost of production, the fracture, prune, all that stuff. So as this 7th worker came in, the 6th worker, by the way, there's no marginal product because you can't have a change when you have a change. You have a change when you go to the 7th worker, when the 7th worker comes in. The marginal product of labor is how much output that worker brings to the table by coming to work. So it's equal to the change in output over the change in labor, which conveniently for us is always just 1 here. It could be different numbers, and there could be more math to it, but here we're always dividing by 1. So let's see. When this worker number 7 comes in, output rises from 2,175 to 2,500. So written out, what we're saying is that this is equal to the new output, 2,500 minus the old of 2,175, over, there used to be
The new number of workers is 7. There used to be 6, and so you're talking about a difference of 325 over 1 is 325.
This worker, when this worker came into work, raised output by 325 units, or would if the worker came to work.
Another worker comes to work. Output rises to 2,800 units. 2,800 minus 2,500 is 300 units. The second worker that we're looking at, the 8th worker actually,
increases output, but only 300 units.
Another worker comes in, and output rises. It looks to me like output rises by 275 units. 3,075 minus 2,800 is, let me double check and make sure, because that's 275 units. So this worker brings 275 units by coming into work. That's the marginal impact of that worker. Another worker comes in. Output rises by 3325 minus 3075, and that is 250 units. So output is rising, but is it rising constantly? No. As more workers come in, output rises at a decreasing rate. That's just called diminishing marginal product, or more broadly, diminishing marginal returns, which we explored at great length, and here it is again. This worker comes in, we go from 3325 to 3550, and that is a difference of 225. If we were to bring in this worker, I can see that that is a difference of 200. That's how much output rose. And then I happen to know this is 175 if another worker comes in. So we have increasing output, but at a decreasing rate. The marginal product of labor is the slope of our production function, if you remember from our cost discussion. The next one is brand new to us, but really not so much. It's just a new term. The concept is stuff we've already talked about. The next column we have to fill in, column number 4, is called marginal revenue product. And that sounds, I mean, three things abbreviated with symbols, three letters for an abbreviation or for a symbol. Oh gosh, but you know what? Think it through for just a second. We already have the marginal product. What's revenue? What's a firm's total revenue? It's price times quantity. Well, that's the quantity and the quantity change already. So marginal for us always means change. Product is the quantity, and revenue, okay, we've got to think about that for just a little bit. Well, if I have the quantity, what's the other part to revenue is price. So this is just equal to the price times the marginal product of labor. Marginal revenue product. It's sort of rearranged from our terms. It's not as convenient as if it was like marginal product revenue. I suppose would be more convenient for us, because then I could be saying it's marginal product times the other thing that gives you revenue. And the humor is in the middle, okay? But look, it's how much money does the additional worker bring to the table or to the top line for the firm. That's why you multiply it by price. Look, if this worker comes in and output rises by 325 units, and each unit's price is $5, that's in the given information at the top of the table, then this is just equal to 5 times the 325 units the additional worker is providing. And I see that that's 1,500 plus another 125. That should be equal to 1,625. The next worker was going to bring 300 more units to production by adding another worker. And the firm can get $5 per unit. That's 1,500. That's the marginal revenue product when the marginal product is 300 units and the price is $5 each. At $5 each, this worker is going to bring 275, so that comes out to be 1,375. 250 times 5, that one's pretty easy, that's 1,250. 1125 is 225 times 5. 200 times 5, I know that one. That's 1,000. And 175 times 5 is 875. So marginal revenue product, another way to think about it is, what does the next worker bring in terms of revenue? Because they're going to bring more quantity times the price, and for these examples, the price is just constant. Now, the reason the price is constant for these examples is because this firm must be a perfectly competitive firm, right? They're not price makers, they're price takers. That's why the price is the same no matter how much they make. If they were a monopoly, as they made more, they could affect price. Then they would be price makers. So we wouldn't be able to multiply all of these by 5. We might have to multiply these by some different prices because of the ability of the firm to flood their own market because they're a sole producer or they have a distinct product. But that's the only difference. Now this next column looks pretty threatening. It also has 3 letters. The MFC, that stands for the marginal factor cost. That clearly is there to give people like me job security. All that means is, what's the cost of this next worker? Because the factor we're talking about is labor. Could be capital, but it's labor here. So the cost of the next worker is our marginal factor cost. And this, how's it described in this text, says, we show that this employer is hiring labor in a perfectly competitive labor market, therefore faces a perfectly elastic supply curve. That's pretty wordy. What that means is they are not bidding up wages by hiring the 6th, or the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th. They're not bidding up wages. Compare that. So this is probably how we think of any firm hiring people. They hire people at the going rate. That's how you and I probably think of firms. Now, a firm in a tiny little town, try to think about that for just a second. As a firm in a tiny little town hires a laborer, they already have that person working for them. If they need to get another person in a tiny town, how do they get somebody else to come to work? Because they might have already hired the laborers who are available. Now they got to draw someone out of retirement or outbid the other employer in town to get another worker. So they might have to start to raise wages as they hire more workers. But this statement that it's a wordy statement, but this statement that this is a perfectly competitive labor market, all they're saying is they're hiring at a fixed wage rate of $1,000. Every time they hire a worker, they have to pay another $1,000. That's why this is 1,000 all the way down. So now we're almost home. Now this is something new, but really not, where we're asked, well, how many workers will the firm hire? Let's start at the bottom here. If you had 12 workers and you decided you were looking at hiring a 13th worker, let's look at what that would imply. The 13th worker, you'd have to pay him or her $1,000. They would make 175 units at $5 each, which means the return to your top line of hiring that worker would be $875. Why would you pay $1,000 if your total revenue change is only going to be $875? You wouldn't do that. So you would not hire this worker for sure. Hiring that worker would be a loss. A loss. Let's start somewhere up here. Let's say you were at 8 workers and we're thinking about moving to 9. The 9th worker is going to bring 275 units at $5 each. So you can make revenue of $1,375, but hiring that worker only costs $1,000. Would you do that? Sure. That's pure profit, $375. So you say, okay, I'll do 9. Okay, I do 9. Would you do 10? Well, let's see. I'll put in the check mark already because I know the answer. The 10th worker is going to bring a net of 250 units change at $5 each, so you're going to be able to get $1,250 revenue improved by bringing in that worker, but the worker only costs you $1,000. You would do that. You would do this. 1125 is greater than 1,000. Where would you stop hiring workers? Right where they're equal, because you wouldn't go past it. And you would do this for sure, so you would stop here. Does this look familiar? Remember, where does the profit maximizing firm optimize its profit? What level of production? Where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Look at these names. Marginal revenue product, marginal fixed cost. You can't get a deal like that in your sociology classes, where the things that you have to memorize are so like straightforward and built on the other things. It's just not like that in those classes. I know because I've had them. This is the best. It's not that complex. And here, let me tell you something else. Now that we've done this, now we've seen this in a second place. For human behavior, the expectation of rational, self-interested beings is that we stop our production of a good or service or an effort where the marginal cost is equal to the marginal benefit. See what I just did there? Marginal cost, I don't know another term for that. It's always the same term. But marginal benefit is this broad umbrella term that covers marginal revenue product, number of dates, whatever. We stop doing something when the next time we try it is going to sting more than it benefits us. We keep doing something as long as the next time we try it, there's some benefit above its cost. So this concept, just like diminishing marginal returns, is everywhere. And now that we've seen this in a second place with another table, that's why I'm illuminating that relationship here. I don't think you would have gotten it until you'd seen it a couple times. So that is, I think, the hardest part of chapter 28. I'm going to have another video segment revisiting supply and demand, just a quick review of that. And then in that segment, I'm going to dabble into how it applies to the labor market a little bit. And then I'll have a video segment with some examples of applications of supply and demand along the lines of some of the homework questions, so you can see I'm not making this stuff up. What we did already with supply and demand really does work for the labor market too. It really does. I'm going to leave you, I think, to go ahead and read about the elasticity aspects, because when you do, you're probably going to stop reading because you're going to say, I already know this stuff, because the elasticity things that we explored apply to labor just like they apply to the other things that we looked at as examples. So that's where we're going with this chapter. That's the end of this piece. I'll see you on the other side.